In this video, we're going to look at some themes from the unit Crime and Punishment on the Islam paper and look at some short practice questions, 4 and 5 markers. Here's a list of questions that we're going to go through. It might be worth pausing the video at this point and maybe doing a mind map on some of these questions, having a think about how you would answer them. In this video, I'm going to do something slightly different from how I usually do it. So instead of giving you a model first paragraph, I'm just going to talk through some of the key points on each of these topics and then leave you to write your own 4 or 5 mark answer. You should by now be quite confident in taking the content, the bullet points on the left, and converting that into the RS mantra, which is on the right, using those sentence starters or adapting them as appropriate. So I'm going to leave that for you to do. Instead, we're just going to have a look at the bullet points and talk through them, make sure that you understand them. So you need a source of wisdom and authority. And if you look at these bullet points, we've got quite a few different sources that you can refer to, which is nice. So the Quran teaches Muslims that justice is important. That's quite a nice starting point, and that's going to get you a mark. And you can sort of use that on lots of different topics and just say that the Quran teaches whatever it is that's important. Obviously, it's good to have a quote, so to stand out firmly for justice in Surah 4, 135. It tells them not to follow personal inclination lest they are not just. So the idea of justice is being fair, not being biased, including not being, say, favoring your own family or friends. There's a hadith as well that talks about Prophet Muhammad saying that that he would even cut off the hand of his daughter if she was to steal. So this idea of the importance of justice is emphasized there, and that it's a general principle that should be followed and shouldn't be kind of bent or changed to suit your own personal needs or your family. Second bullet point, the Quran sets out strict rules to ensure that those accused of crime are treated justly. So there's if someone falsely accuses others, then they can be punished. And there's a quote there from or reference there to the surah. For example, if you accuse a woman of, say, adultery, there needs to be 4 witnesses to show that, and then if that isn't, then the witnesses are to receive the kind of punishment that the woman would have received. Justice is an obligation in Islam. Again, that's quite a nice, easy point to pick up. The Quran says that Allah commands justice and fair dealing. We've looked at this quote. There's quite a long quote there that you should have in your books. It also bans oppression and calls on Muslims to be generous in giving. So there's a link to zakah. We can also add points like that it is part of Allah's nature to be just. So it's one of the names of Allah as the just. And hopefully you can think of some other points. So take 2 of those bullet points, or maybe even develop one of your own. You've got lots of quotes there and references that you can use. So pause the video and give this question a go using the RS mantra. So now we're going to have a look at Muslim teachings about crime. And if you look carefully at these bullet points, you've got the same reference that we had in the last slide to Surah 16, verse 90 and also verse 91. So that first quote, Allah orders justice and good conduct and forbids immorality, bad conduct and oppression. Obviously, especially the first half of that quote could have been used on the previous question. So Muslims should obey the law. They should obey the will of Allah, and crime goes against these things. Also in that quote, there's talk about promises and keeping your promises. So Muslims are expected to fulfill the covenant of Allah. Covenant is another word for promise, both to Allah and to other people. So there are crimes that are connected with kind of breaking contract or promises that you've made. Another quite nice point that can be made is Allah will judge Muslims on the day of resurrection, the day of judgment. So this is a crucial Muslim belief, and that could be applied to lots of different topics. You can see hopefully how that applies quite nicely to crime. So our actions will be judged. We're being tested, and breaking the law, committing crimes is something that people will be judged for. Yeah, I forgot to say to pause the video, but if you want, you can just rewind 10 seconds or so and have a look at the previous slide and give that a go. Now we're going to have a look at the purpose of suffering. So some points here on how you can develop this into a 5 marker. So the suffering is a test. That's a very common Muslim belief, and there's a nice quote: "We shall test you with something of fear and hunger." So that's part of what this life is about. That Allah tests us and we'll be judged. Again, this idea of judgment can link in nicely. You've got the Prophet Ayub or Job. We looked at quite a bit of detail on the story of Job when we looked at Christianity. He's a righteous servant of God or Allah. He's afflicted by suffering for a long time, but Job never loses faith. So the story of Job is recorded in the Quran as well. So you don't necessarily need to remember the exact reference, but you can mention the Prophet and that the Quran talks about how he never lost faith. And the tradition says he will be a leader in paradise of those who patiently endure suffering. So this idea that Muslims will also need to, in their life, endure suffering, and Job, as one of the prophets, is an example of that. This obviously nicely links to how the prophets could be an example for Muslims. So it links nicely with a previous topic as well. So don't forget to cross link some of these the things that you're learning in the different units. A Muslim's patient response to suffering is an example of faithfulness to the rest of the world. So as a result, people are drawn to Allah. So the way Muslims respond to suffering can make other people kind of stop and think about the meaning and truth of Islam. So pause the video, have a read through those bullet points. Maybe you've got some other things you might want to write about. The purpose of suffering, there's some quotes there and references that you can use. So pause the video and transform that into the RS mantra. The teachings from the Quran about punishment. So we've got lots of quotes that we can refer to here. So the Quran is provided as guidance for Muslims on how to live, including what is lawful and unlawful. So Surah 4:26 says, "It is Allah's will to make things clear to you, guide you to the noble ways of those before you, and to turn to you in mercy." So just this general idea of the Quran as a guide, but it also links to what is lawful and unlawful. So the Quran provides punishments. It specifies punishments for a variety of crimes, so the Haddad crimes that you should be aware of. So then this will guide Muslims to follow the right path, the straight path, the kind of righteous way that you should live that will please Allah and bring rewards. Clearly then the consequences for those who don't abide by Allah's teachings is judgment. So again, this theme of judgment comes up, and Surah 4:29 talks about, "O believers, do not devour one another's wealth illegally, but rather trade by mutual consent. Do not kill each other or yourselves." And a bit later, verse 30, "Whoever does this sinfully and unjustly, we will burn them in the fire." So this idea of judgment. It mentions there about consuming another's wealth illegally or unjustly. So it gives an example of crime there, and that the kind of punishment that will come with that. So that links to the ideas of punishment. Humanity isn't perfect. So again, this is the same surah there, talks about that how mankind was created weak, but Allah is willing to forgive those who repent. So the idea that maybe punishment should allow criminals to see that what they've done is wrong, and therefore to seek Allah's mercy in their lives. There's another surah that we will look at in class, which is Surah 2, verse 178, which talks about punishment. So it says, "Prescribed for you is legal retribution for those murdered." So the Quran teaches this. One of the purposes of punishment is for retribution, in particular where someone has committed murder. Therefore, the right thing that should happen is they should suffer as well. That's the idea of retribution. The notion of an eye for an eye and that sort of thing is linked to retribution. There can also be the idea of where there's good conduct. So in that same quote, it says there should be a suitable follow-up and payment to him with good conduct. So it might be that a form of punishment might be to pay and to do good to make up for what's gone wrong. So that might link into ideas of perhaps reform as a purpose of punishment. There's also in that same, it's quite a long quote, talks about whoever transgresses after that will have a painful punishment. So there's a notion that there could be mercy and forgiveness, but if someone continues to transgress, that means to kind of break the law, to do what is wrong, then it may be suitable for painful punishment. This could link into even ideas of perhaps torture, so an element of severe punishment as a form of not retribution, as a form of deterrence. So the punishment is so bad that people don't want to commit crimes. That deters them from committing crimes. So there's quite a few ideas that you can talk about here in terms of what the Quran teaches about punishment. Pause the video, use some of the bullet points or some of the things that I've mentioned, and convert that into the RS mantra. Okay, so I've talked through quite a lot. This is maybe hopefully a simpler one. It's a 4-marker. Obviously, forgiveness is important in the Quran, and we've looked at some quotes already connected with that. Allah's nature is to be forgiving, so all merciful and forgiving, and so on. So I'm just going to leave you with this one. If you pause the video, you can give this one a go. It's just a 4-marker. You don't have to include a quote, but you can include a quote or reference to the Quran. Okay, so here's a 5-marker about Muslim attitudes towards torture. So some of the punishments that are written in the Quran, such as having the hands cut off for those who steal, could be seen as a kind of form of torture, and that would show that torture is acceptable in some circumstances. Remember the quote that we looked at just a moment ago, where it said, but whoever transgresses after that will have a painful punishment. So the idea that if other forms of punishment haven't worked, then a painful punishment, a kind of form of torture, might be appropriate in those kind of circumstances. So that's one attitude that Muslims could take towards torture. Another, we've looked at the ideas of forgiveness and how Allah is merciful. So that would obviously link into punishment. And the Quran even teaches to forego is closer to righteousness. So the idea that although it might be just to punish someone, it might be better not to punish them, to show mercy. And that probably shows, or could be seen to show, that torture would go against Muslim beliefs, that it wouldn't, it doesn't show the right kind of level of mercy. Some Muslims think that justice is the most important aspect of punishment, and that would also include treating criminals justly as well, and they might consider torture to be unjust treatment. So if you consider torture to always be unjust, then Muslims, because of the importance of justice, stand out firmly for justice and so on. Could apply that you shouldn't, in your anger, harm or hurt others, but after kind of consideration, give them a fair punishment and not one that's kind of torturous. So use those ideas, pause the video, and transform that into the RS mantra. Okay, so 2 reasons why some Muslims support the use of capital punishment. This is a nice question because it should put you in mind of a possible 12-mark question, which could be something like, all Muslims should support the use of capital punishment. And in order to be prepared for that kind of 12-marker, you should know at least 2 reasons why some would support capital punishment and 2 reasons why some would not support capital punishment. So kind of make sure you could do both sides. That's one of these 5 markers that you can easily see converted into a 12 marker. So here we're just going to look at one side of this, but bear in mind that there are some Muslims who would reject these arguments and go against capital punishment. Okay, but the first thing is the Quran does allow capital punishment, although only for the most serious of crimes. Also, Prophet Muhammad specified adultery, murder, and apostasy. So apostasy is kind of leaving and abandoning the religion of Islam, maybe going against Islam, putting Islam at threat in some way because of your actions. So in these cases, again, just to give the other side, some Muslims might think that this kind of commandment is given in a particular circumstance, particularly the apostasy one, where Islam was being attacked. And so if you kind of abandoned Islam and kind of joined the other side, then that was quite a serious thing to do. Anyway, we'll look at a bit more obviously in the lessons about arguments for and against capital punishment. Secondly, it brings justice to the victim or family of the victim. So the Quran only forbids taking innocent life. Capital punishment can be used to uphold the law. So obviously when you're executing someone, they are not an innocent life. And it gives a sense of justice to the victims, which we've said is an important feature of justice, that the victims or the family of the victim feel that justice has been done. This also links maybe quite closely to the idea of retribution, of kind of paying for what you have done, which links to the idea of an eye for an eye. So that's this idea of the law of equality. If you've taken a life, then your life should be taken. That's the only right and just response. So in the Quran quote that I think I mentioned earlier, it gives various examples: the slave for the slave, the female for the female, a life for a life, basically. So pause the video here and give this a go using the RS mantra, taking those bullet points and writing out a nice 5-mark answer. Okay, I hope that was helpful. I'm just going to leave you with this screen here. So if you want to pause and give a go at one of those questions using some of the ideas, see how good your memory is from what we've gone through. Maybe you made some notes going through, but I'll just leave this here so you can pause and perhaps go back and have a go at some of those questions that maybe you didn't do first time around. Thank you very much.